Welcome everyone to this discussion today, and before we begin, I'd like to let you know that this panel will last altogether around 60 minutes, which consists of 45 minutes of moderated discussion with our experts, and the last 15 minutes will be allocated to the Q&A. And first of all, I like to ask you all just to keep our answers short and to the point, so we can hear as many perspective as possible and stay within our time frame. So let's begin. My first question to you is, how can governments and international institutions strike a balance between strengthening national economy resilience and preserving the benefits of global cooperation in trade?
Well, that should probably mean I get to give the shortest and easiest answer, and things will get more difficult as it goes down that way, I think. No pressure. Look, I think it's a perennial problem, and coming from the Australian perspective, I think we have had to deal with this set of challenges now for the best part of 20 to 30 years, which is to try to strike a balance between maintaining robust trade relationships, given that the Australian national economy is heavily trade-oriented, but at the same time recognise that that there are national security concerns. Speaking again from the Australian experience, I think we've managed to achieve, and I don't know if this is extendable to other nation states, I don't want to suggest that this is necessarily a pathway, but the most important issue has been to firstly ensure that there is a robust global set of trading rules that enables a trading nation to navigate difficulties should they exist at a bilateral level, and Australia actually relied upon an open global trading regime only about 3 or 4 years ago when market access to China was curtailed. The second thing that is important is to be perennially mindful of the need to monitor where potential risks are in supply chains. And at a national level, we undertook an assessment about 4 years ago of potential supply chain vulnerabilities to determine the extent to which there are genuine risks, as opposed to knee-jerk reactions as to what possible risks people might perceive there to be. And the detailed assessments showed, in fact, that of just about every category of product that Australia imports, no more than 2 were ones in which the country did not have alternative supply options. So having a clear picture of what it is that you do, what it is that you need, what it is that you, the extent to which you have options is critical. And provided that you have clarity around what the reality is, as opposed to what your fears might be, then you're ultimately in a better position to navigate this balancing act question.
So thank you so much. I have to thank Observer Research Foundation and also the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs for the invitation. And from my perspective from Cambodia, I think international governments, all governments, will need to balance between their strategic national interest with that of the region and of the global community. But first of all, depend on your national economic interest. You cannot just give in to, the geopolitical competitions that sometimes driven by some major powers for their national interest. From my perspective, we look at some ASEAN member countries. They are very good at managing those political competition and also the external pressure from certain countries, including from the US. On the one hand, some countries benefit a lot from Chinese investment. Right? They stay quiet, and then when their national interest and the interests of their allies, major allies, coincide, they stay quiet, but they target those other countries that are called non-friendly countries. That I think, why don't we try to promote more international cooperation in a way that benefits can be shared among smaller, middle, and larger nations? Why do countries need to commit themselves to the lose-lose global race or race for global dominance at the expense of many countries? Given the recent imposition of tariff on many countries around the world, right? Including Cambodia, 49% of tariff has been, I think, imposed by Trump administration. We rely about, I think maybe, let's say this, put this, around 40% of Cambodian total export, around 40% of the total export go to the U.S. market. And if they want to, the U.S. want to calibrate that foreign trade policy, but they should target those countries that give them economic leverage, economic benefits, because trade make, I think we talked this morning, we heard the speaker this morning, and also yesterday too, Eric said that the rise of China has also given, the growth impetus for many countries, including the U.S., Australia, European countries. But so my thought is this: with trade, because geopolitical powers and dominance is mapped out by how much trade volume is. If you look at the trade statistics, Chinese export to the world dominate, maybe more than account for 60% of the global trade activity, right? And then in this case, maybe we try to slow down a little bit on geopolitical competition and cut down on over-securitization. I think I agree somehow to Professor Warwick on, in certain instances, we have to pay a lot of attention to the national security. On one hand, technological development sometimes come quietly and then protruding or affecting national security. But I have seen a lot of narratives and articulation of security concerns, and at the same time they spend so much time and energy on security, and then it goes nothing, it goes nowhere. But then China quietly have been developing their technological capacity. We used to talk a lot about a trade war between China and the US over the past 20 years and more recently over the past 10 years or so during the first Trump administration. But China quietly moved up their industrial and technical ladder to now promoting more automation used by AI, and then AI will drive the global trade and competitiveness. So before I end my remark, I think maybe countries should focus more on international cooperation in technological areas, and then identify where your strategic sectors are and work together. I give another example. Germany is quietly working with China, particularly on the auto industry, the auto makers. BMW is investing and cooperating with Chinese automakers. Have you heard about that? So many. They produce 600 cars per factory, just per factory in Chongqing. And that is how smart Germany, the BMW, has been in working closely and also quietly to benefit, to take advantage of technological capability of China. And why the US, why Western world should pay more attention. You cannot win because of the demographic dividends China has. 1.5 billion equal to the whole Africa. So it's one country in Asia. The population is, the whole Africa population is just amount to the population of China. So population 4.7 of around 5 billion people in Asia alone. How could you win Asia? So I think, but in this case, I think maybe country need to work more on promoting your technological capability in certain sectors or industries, or co-opting with some country, not specifically with China, but with Korea, with Japan, with Malaysia, with some other country for your economic interest. So I'd like to end from where I start. Thank you.
Yeah, I recall when the financial crisis broke out. I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that if you're talking about the financial plumbing in an economy, something's gone really wrong. It's something like real plumbing that you don't really want to know much about. And it feels like the securitization debate is somewhat similar. Of course, there are security concerns in the economy, but they should be limited to very, very limited sectors. Military, very sensitive military materials, by the way, like nuclear or something like that makes a lot of sense. Uranium sourcing, stuff like that. But, if you think you're going to really withhold the printing press, it didn't work out too well for the Catholic Church. They got the Reformation. That's the case with most consumer technologies. So if you're talking about security, you're probably doing something wrong. It should be something done in dark military planning rooms and not talked about very much. Actually, I know that sounds kind of blunt, but it's true. It should be a very limited activity in a planning system, but it's not anymore. And even in terms of how we're doing it, it's kind of nonsensical. We put out a paper at the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs a while ago where we compared the basic capabilities of NATO economies and BRICS economies, not because we wanted to foment the bloc divisions taking place. We don't. It's exactly the opposite reason we put it out. But it was very illustrative because, to my mind, if you think about technology and so on, like what technologies can go into military production? Well, it can be anything from optics, it can be optics, it can be high explosives, or it can be steel, it can go right down to steel. And so if you look at the input on like, an aircraft or an artillery piece or a missile, like everything's dual use in it. So if you start like picking the whole thing apart and saying, well, we need to control each part of that supply chain, it's like going crazy, right? It's like trying to count the number of grains of sand on a beach, in a sense. So the way I'd approach it personally is to focus on the very sensitive issues like arms control, the usual things that we used to not talk about and we just kind of assumed were done. And then if you're really concerned about your actual security, you probably want to just take a couple of boxes. First is food security, second is energy security, and then maybe third is basic inputs. That's debatable, but you're talking about maybe basic steel inputs, stuff like that. Now, the enormous irony of what's happened in the past couple of years is we're all debating what parts go into a missile, but in Europe, we don't even have access to cheap energy. This gives rise to a number of ironies. Another one, we say, well, we want to rearm because we think the Russians are going to invade or something, but we don't have cheap energy, so our plant and machines our industrial plants are shutting down. Audi's shutting down in Germany. Well, how are you going to build any tanks without input from any energy sector or whatever? So it's almost like, I don't want to sound too facetious about it, but the securitization debate has turned everyone kind of into an armchair economist, and lo and behold, they focused on the wrong issues. From a national security point of view, the first things you should want are access to food, energy, maybe basic raw materials, and then you probably want a reasonably good industrial economy. We thought for a long time you didn't need an industrial economy for war anymore. Wrong, we know that now. But we're not focused on that. And I guess that brings back to the initial point of what kicked off the entire securitization debate. Everyone thinks it was kicked off by the Ukraine war. It wasn't. It was kicked off in 2016 by the election of Donald Trump, where Donald Trump got elected on a platform for industrialization that had very little to do with military. It had to do with American voters being sick of not having access to good industrial jobs. He gets elected on that, and let's call a spade. The national security state saw that as an opportunity to try and funnel money into the military-industrial complex. That's exactly what happened in America. And so the MAGA movement was attempted to be steered in this securitization direction, which is everything from decoupling to de-risking and all this stuff. That has nothing to do with industrializing America, or if it does, it's tangential. So this is what's happened. We got ourselves into this terrible rut. I think we overdid free trade for a long time. I think that's kind of consensus now. We overdid free trade. And then we tried to correct. And the initial correction was American voters aren't happy. We want reindustrialization. And that went through the Washington incentive sieve. And what came out the other side was decoupling, de-risking, some sort of national security strategy, and this strange focus on minutiae of what goes into an F-16 fighter. And then what comes out of that? A bunch of tariffs. And America waking up to the fact that China can shut off gallium exports and shut down their entire electronics industry. And I mean, I don't mean to sound facetious or like a know-it-all or anything, but I'm sitting there like, I've been talking about for 18 months that they can shut off your gallium. But no one's listening because they're having these bizarre debates amongst themselves about all these like minutiae in the supply chain, whatever it is, when the basic questions are actually much simpler. Just on the gallium point, and I'll finish on that just to give a sense. If you want gallium, you need an aluminium or aluminum, as the Americans say, facilities, okay? That's how you get gallium, it's a byproduct of aluminium processing of bauxite ore. Okay, you can't get that overnight. If you want to see how long it took the Chinese to build up their aluminium processing capacities, it's probably about 10 years, it might be 20. But no one's going to get a plan for that. And so you're at a point where you're like, okay, everyone's talking about these minutiae of where the optics come from on, an F-16 or on a rifle. And, the economists will step in and say, well, you want to be very careful with that because all these rare minerals, they're not even rare, they're actually very common, but they're byproducts of industrial processes. All these now come from China. And then, you engage in tariffs to try and do this de-risking strategy, and then suddenly, oh look, you don't have gallium coming in, you don't have germanium coming in. Rare earth metals are now threatened because the processing facilities are all in China. And it's actually even quite hard to get the ore. You have to go out to Central Asia if you want an alternative for the ore, and then you have to get a process. And so none of these things were discussed. So I think if I were to summarize what I just said, I'd be very skeptical of securitization narratives. They shouldn't be public debates at all. They should be very private, behind-door debates. They should be very limited. And in fact, I strongly believe that the military planners should have very limited input on that because I don't think they understand anything about this. And then finally, if you do want to focus on your national security, start with the basics. Start with food and energy. Maybe basic inputs, then maybe. And then have a decent debate about how much industry you want in your economy, because industry is ultimately going to be what produces weaponry and machinery and so on.
Now I'm already in the lucky position I can actually comment on previous comments. But I think Philip and I, we have pretty much the same starting point. The teaching of Smith and Ricardo is not overnight just become wrong, right? And if we are accepting this starting point, then we would probably also see that states or regional integration organizations have always put their individual, national or regional interests first. However, for a long while, that was globalization. Globalization served certain economic players best for their national interests. And now we've seen a reassessment that globalization leads to the problem that your runner-up is coming closer and closer. And somebody in the Americas has probably felt the breath already in the neck. So they have basically shifted to a different strategy, and this is this strategic competition. And I think that's not a process which I would basically pinpoint to 2016, because when you look at it in the United States, they have been developing economic security tools for, I would say, even decades, and they have at their disposal a huge arsenal of instruments. Just the latest are outbound investment screening. Inward investment screening they have been doing for a long while. Tariffs are old school, maybe not in the way as they are used today, but all those are instruments in a toolbox of a nation state to pursue its interest. And now the question is really, since we have not really mentioned the European Union, and we are here in the European Union, what's in our interest? So if it's true that trade actually generates wealth and prosperity, I think we see very well that this is a model which, at least for the European Union, has been working very well. I mean, look to Hungary as a success story. And Hungary is so successful because it's a member of the European Union. We should not forget that. How do we allow for this level of integration? It's trust. It's trust among each other. Of course, it's in some days a bit stronger, and the other days a bit less strong. But overall, we are trusting each other. And the problem beyond the European Union is that trust is significantly, let's say, challenged, especially in the transatlantic relationship, but also towards other players. So what can we do as a European Union? The European Union, I think, can do two things. They can, in particular, deepen integration, being a space where people, goods, service, capital is freely floating around. This creates prosperity. And then engaging on various levels with those partners where we can create the sufficient level of trust to liberalize. I think I'll stop here.
So it's obviously it's a very important question. What should governments, what should countries do right now? If you would have asked this question a year ago, or 6 years ago, or 18 years ago, then I would probably have agreed with what was mentioned before. The two gentlemen before me were talking extensively about economic issues, and I also agree with you that if you look at what makes sense for a country, then obviously connectivity, what Hungary is doing right now, that we want to trade with every potential partner which is out there. So we would love to export, we would love to import, we would love to trade with others. That makes sense. So that is what makes sense. That is what is good. That is what has caused the great moderation from the 1980s when inflation stayed low, whereas growth rates were strong. So there was a strong economic growth in the world, and inflation figures were quite low. On the other hand, you asked the question today, and today we have a different setting in my opinion, because if this question is asked, I also think that we have to distinguish between bigger and smaller countries, or bigger and smaller players, because a big country or a big player will decide what's the game. So whether we are playing soccer or it's table tennis or something else. And then small players, they have to understand what is the new game, what are the rules, and then we have to play the game the big players have decided we have to play. And right now, as I see, the US has decided, and when they decide, this is a good question, but it seems that right now there's a decision, at least for this presidential term, that reindustrialization of the US and dealing with the huge trade deficit of the US is a very important goal for them. So this means that the strategy of the US is determined by their perspective, by their desires. And there is China, which is which was very successful in this free trade environment. Even if you look at the exports, even more successful recently than the US, who invented the game, let's say. And obviously for them, for China, it would make more sense to play the whole game because they are, they have best players, right? It seems from their perspective. So this is their interest. But the interests are colliding right now. And then there we have the European Union, and it's a good question. What is the strategy of the European Union right now? If there is any strategy or any visible strategy, please let me know. But I think it's very, very important to decide what we want to do, or at least to adapt to any of the two big players. Unfortunately, I don't really see a good strategy. And in some areas where I do see some decisions which were made, then these were not necessarily the best decisions. That the decoupling from the Russians related the energy, it makes very little sense in my opinion. But otherwise, I don't really see what is the strategy of the European Union. And I think that if US will play the game what US is intended to play, then obviously it sets the stage, it sets the rules, and then Hungary for sure, but I think also the European Union has to adapt to this game. And even if the strategy of reindustrialization and focusing on strengthening the domestic production is quite the opposite of what we've seen before when the world was doing free trade, we'll see higher inflation figures in my opinion. We'll see smaller growth rates. We'll see the situation will be worse if you look at employment, the wage growth. So it's not the good news if this is the new game, but we have to adapt and we have to try to maneuver to have as small negative consequences and possibly also some positive consequences as
well. When I can directly come back to what's the strategy of the European Union, I think the strategy of the European Union is a balancing act, as we're all trying to undertake, and I think it's actually is the famous three Ps: partner, promote, and protect. So we are trying to promote innovation in the European Union and competition on the internal market, because actually the only real way to protect ourselves against malicious actors is being highly competitive, because this generates economic power, and this is where we can do more in Europe, especially by clearly restricting existing barriers to trade in the European Union. Partner, I think the European Union is continuing to engage worldwide with quite ambitious trade deals, and you can also see that the appetite for trade deals has significantly been increasing over the couple, let's say, one year since the Trump administration, Trump 2 administration is in office. So certainly this is also actually a good news, and protect. There are basically a flood of measures trying to address the various security concerns, and I'm happy that the European Union is not decoupling, but is trying basically to de-risk. This is a very sensitive approach, trying to find various partners to deal with. I wish my own country, Germany, would have done so earlier when it came to Russian gas. So we had to learn this lesson in a very hard fashion. I wish everyone that they don't have to learn this, and I hope they are going to be that strong to survive that lesson.
Just quick, and I will be very, very brief. So promote, partner, protect, yeah, obviously it sounds great, but if you look at the actual situation, you said promote innovation. If you look at any innovation measures, how well is Europe doing compared to China, how well is Europe doing compared to the US, I don't know any figure which shows that we are doing. We always say that we want to improve, we want to be the best out there, but unfortunately numbers are not really proving that we are successful in this. Partner, yeah, but if you ask Russia, if you ask China, even if you ask the US, whether we are always the best partners for them, I don't know what their answer would be. And protect, I mean,
Russia's a very difficult partner right now.
Obviously, yeah, but for Russia, I totally understand. I totally see the point. But okay, but with whom we are partnering right now, so I don't really see a big partner with whom we have a good relationship.
America is doing actually quite well.
Yeah, we have seen some tourists as well as an act of partnership. Okay, so
America.
Okay, then yeah, I understand. Okay, you're right. And protect. I mean, we were not really successful in protecting the European Union against inflation, against a drop in the GDP, or I mean, a negative influence on the economic growth. So. And I have some fears that we will have some problems protecting you from war as well. We were not really doing well in that as well. But I hope you're right.
We're building tanks now in full manufacturing.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's move on to the second round. I'd like to ask you that how do you think in this complex situation which you have just described from different angles, how can in this situation emerging markets and the new and upcoming non-Western alliances such as the BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as such, how can they navigate in this landscape? What can be their strategies, and how do you think actions of Western countries, including the American tariffs and the various foreign policy and economy policies of the European Union, impacting these countries and these organizations?
Before diving into it, I just want to reflect a little bit on what Philip said earlier about gallium. In September 2023, when China first announced that it would require applications for exports of gallium, I was on Al Jazeera with some American interlocutors, and they basically said, that's all meaningless, nothing. And I pointed at the time that this was actually a very subtle message, and perhaps China needed to be more explicit, because the Americans couldn't understand subtle message. Then maybe they need to have a very direct message before they got the message. And what we've seen in the last 3 weeks is a direct message, right? And that is that China will strangle supply of critical minerals if need be, despite efforts to present the message in a subtle way, which is, let's have a discussion about what your objectives are, and let's see if we can't come to some common understandings about what our objectives are, and how perhaps we might help each other get to where we want to go. recorded remarks also said maybe he'd welcome Chinese manufacturing. The problem with trade is actually a production problem. You can only sell what you make. Trade is a symptom of what kind of an economy you have. It's not cause of the kind of economy that you have. And if you spend 40 to 50 years creating a financialised economy, then what you'll export are financial products, otherwise known as American dollars and financial instruments and IOUs. That's what happened. And so the attempt to reindustrialise America is in many regards a fool's errand. And this gets me to, I guess, where the BRICS countries and others are coming from. And that is that these countries that have experienced the benefits of trade, and they've begun to experience the benefits of capital mobility and the development of productive capacity. Importantly, it's also involved the development of energy security and a growing degree of energy sovereignty. I appreciate the comments made by our journalists about energy, because without energy security, you're always going to be vulnerable to external pressures. Energy and food security are the foundation stones of a sovereign community. Right? People need food and machines need fuel. It's pretty simple. BRICS supports that amongst its members and then enables them to trade meaningfully with each other, to grow the diversity of their economies and to expand the complexity of their various respective economies. You'll notice that over the course of the last 10 years, the economic growth rate of BRICS members and the rate of trade growth amongst BRICS members has surpassed that of the traditional advanced economies. BRICS nations and the wider global south will continue to experience rates of economic growth and rates of trade growth that are greater than those that the advanced nations are going to experience. Which leads to a view from the world of BRICS, and that is there is no desire to cut off trade and capital flow relationships with the advanced world. But the advanced world, the transatlantic powers, choose to cut themselves off, then there's only so much that BRICS and the global south can do about it. They've articulated the voices very clearly over the course of the last few years that they believe that severing trade relationships is to the disadvantage of all parties. But I think there's a point, an inflection point historically, where their capacity to persuade has reached the bottom, and their willingness to persist in persuading the first world that these decisions are not in either party's interests has also reached rock bottom. BRICS economies will continue doing what they do. They will continue to expand their trade relationships. They will continue to expand their investment relationships. And if the global north detaches itself from that, then that's an unfortunate byproduct of the anxieties that the global north is now experiencing. And that's a shame for the world, but there's so much that the global south can do to persuade the global north that there are better ways.
Thank you for the question. I think one thing we should take into consideration is that power is relative and it is dynamic. It keeps changing and evolving all the time. To put it into comparison, two countries can never grow at the same time. I mean, two major countries. So when one country is rising, another is already declining. So we have to agree on that point. I think for countries, I do agree with the point what we just mentioned. So if the Western powers try to cut or to push other countries, particularly the international groupings of by BRICS away, they will get stronger because we can go ahead in grouping and regrouping at a greater scale by themselves. We have seen over the past 6 months when the BRICS country was trying to establish its own currency. But until today, we're looking at, because I think maybe member countries are still trying to stand on different ground. If you look at individual BRIC member countries, they try to benefit from the West, try to benefit from Africa, from America, from China, from Russia at the same time. I mean, China is trying to promote more. They are still now trying to figure out whether the BRIC currency will have to be developed and to put into circulation. So in this regard, I think we should not, the country should not push or should not impose too much restrictive measures, including sanctions on the country. But we have to calculate that sanction very, very well. Sanctions can be applicable, but we have to calculate that very, very well. Otherwise, countries would be pushed away, and then regionalization and also fragmenting of trade and investment promotions. And at the same time, we put the benefits of global population at risk of more disadvantage as countries try to protect their advancement to their own interest and their own grouping at the expense of what humanity. I think maybe when we talk about humanity, some countries may shape perhaps because they just want the benefit of the country, not the benefit for the country. So as a global opinion thinkers, as leaders, we think of the benefit of the country, because if you try to tie or you impose too much pressure on a smaller state, for example, maybe we have other options. We suffer for a short time, but we have many other options around in the region. We have greater cooperation. For example, we diversify our trade relations with India, with Middle East, with UAE, with Australia, with New Zealand. Because West tried to impose a lot of countries. For example, 10 years ago, I was and I was going to support the government, but I was hired to do it to us. They said, the West European Union do not want to be in this country. But then we signed a agreement with this country, and then we asked, why you switch it from your attitude that you are not working with this government into making an agreement. Because we see the economic benefits. You see, this is how we can see governments has always changed, and then how could the world trust you? And if you're looking really to recalibrate your leadership, global leadership, or leadership, you have to be very sure that what you are taught today and 10 years will be the same. That's how we call it integrity, right? Because integrity, global integrity transcends time space.
Yeah, I think I completely echo what the views have said. To the question of the last is what's stagnation, why is not your words about there's all some issues like well interest and stuff. I think we're not we are to fine as words and I think things as well then actually have lines and that's a move. So you can trade with that right and you can for example the suppose so we're really saying also the trade that was done to anything and not the form for possible was not the like complete upright well there's the word and there's something we can do with that is whether it's much price or much and mostly increase factors and actually so I'm saying I'll say how didn't work but I'm saying is the world too low China and they put the restriction well we're saying we live the we watch pennies what we can price right so trade we're you can just trade with something well I know for example Western Europe you what works that this working youth in the world in a way that most people already are and if we don't come from that industry similar to the last day the way you are is demands so what you do so basically we go to and you find something you're just really for now that's really and the tariffs not working work that's me at CEOs department it's first industry the world for industry into if you don't talk about tariffs are there because really connected monopolies and monopoly tariffs no you're mentioning those tariffs and no you completely relevant it's something marketing you go to more something involving the way those CEOs and actually so I'm not saying it's more of a but it's talking about the listen if you listen very much saying and you're essentially American well this with camera or something saying on the you're saying you're I seriously think we're so that's the real it's the best of what it wants getting the complete role 2030 it's very
expansion, it takes two to tango. And from a especially EU perspective, I think the Union is some policy should be and then stop measuring. That's I think a very important lesson which we are just about to learn right now. I think about to create one of the other opportunity. We have an active market. This is how to roughly consumers and how it is to trade with our operating friends can experience in right now. And they're just lucky that we have hope. So we need to empathy. But that aside, my point here is less ideological, more basically fact-based, driven trade partnerships.
So there are two questions: what field it may be, and how can emerging markets navigate? The field, obviously, negative on each and every opinions. Obviously, as he has discussed, free trade was good for the economies in the world. Obviously, if we move to more segmented markets, it's bad for economies, higher inflation, low growth. So it's a bad thing. I think the reason why the manufacturers, German especially, were lobbying against the tariffs because obviously not. It was not there. They will be. It's easy for cars in Europe. But the problem was that they knew that there would be countermeasures which will hurt them. So this is a problem that the impact is negative. And if you focus on the world outside of the US, then if the US succeeds in what they are aiming to bring back some industrial production and decrease the trade deficit, then obviously the other countries will have the other side of the coin. So they will be impacted. So global industrial production outside of the US has to. If they are able to bring back some industrial production, and also the world outside of the US, they have a smaller trade surplus, obviously. So there are really negative consequences for the rest of the world outside of the US, and somehow they have to distribute the consequences. So some countries or some regions will feel more the consequences, and some countries and some regions will feel less negative consequences. How can then countries navigate? Obviously, there's this route which was partly mentioned that if the US or if, let's say, the European Union is not playing that game, but if somebody is slapping you with some tariffs, then you stand back. Okay, so there is this way that you can play the classical game for that. If they hurt us, we hurt them, and then we'll see what comes out of this game. We already saw the trend in the US with the tariffs approaching or even exceeding 150%. So that is probably not the right path, in my opinion. But it will be hard to have some strategies. So I think it's a very good question. Emerging markets and even more advanced economies doing this situation, it will be very hard, in my opinion, to play this game because nobody played that in the recent past. So we have to figure out a strategy for ourselves. And another thing which was mentioned here is to retaliate. If something with tariffs, you also increase tariffs. It's very easy to play this game. On the other hand, obviously right now it's not just so they're used in a very new way, a very innovative way, in my opinion, So what we can see right now, it's not just the US is increasing tariffs, but the US is playing with the tariffs. It's US creating big uncertainty with the tariffs, not the slapping tariffs. Slapping country tariffs say, okay, right now increase the tariffs and tomorrow increase it, and then for 90 days we go back to the previous situation, and then something else happens. There's a big uncertainty. And as another country, as another player, you cannot really say that the US is hurting you with tariffs, but most of the tariffs were not introduced. But on the other hand, if you play this game, if you increase the uncertainty regarding tariffs, it has an exact same effect as having tariffs in the day. Because if you're a company which operates in the big supply chain, and you know that you have other companies and countries from which you buy stuff, if the tariffs are high, it's a problem for you, the costs will increase, and you try to bring back some of these production steps to another country where tariffs are lower, to your own country where there are no tariffs. But you do exactly the same if there's a big uncertainty because you don't know what will happen. You don't know whether if you import stuff from Cambodia, it will be with 4% tariffs or 0% whatever. And then what you do as a company, okay, you also bring your production back to countries where the tariff rates will be lower or uncertainty will be lower as well. So right now the US is playing uncertainty game, and it's very hard to do anything with this game because it's not actual tariffs, but it's just increasing the uncertainty.
Thank you very much for your very thorough, again, intriguing opinions. Now we have to move on to the Q&A, and I'm turning to the audience. We still have time for some questions. First, I'd like to ask everyone who's asking a question to please first introduce yourself by telling us your name and organization and affiliation. And as our time is limited, please keep your questions brief and to point.
Thanks for a wonderful panel. My name is Steffen Hindelang from the International University Professor, and I'll be with the Hungary Institute for International Affairs. So one intervention, I thought the characterization of China not using its market to coerce was just completely crazy. Ask the Lithuanians, ask the Canadians, ask the Australians, ask the Japanese, South Koreans, Taiwanese, Southeast Asians. They clearly have a long track record of doing this. But at the same time, we should be clear the Americans are doing this now. So I think it's just not intellectually honest to say the Chinese aren't doing this, but we should say the Americans are doing this right now. I guess my question is really with this trade and transition and tariffs and the next global economy, how are we envisioning the next global economy? Because some good friends talk about kind of a barbell where the China is one economy that connects many economies, and the U.S. is another economy that connects many economies, and there's a small link between the two economies where trade occurs. So I'm interested in terms of thinking about the countries that you represent. How are you going to negotiate this, I think, very